Okay, welcome to ESL Level 4. This will be Lesson 5. Thus far we've covered nouns and pronouns. We've talked about verbs. We've talked a little bit about verb agreement and other parts of speech. And tonight I want to talk about phrases and clauses, other parts of the sentence structure. But before we do that, I'm going to I'm going to talk first about some idioms. I've got 5 idioms written up here. 1, a broken heart. 2, a cross to bear. 3, a voice crying in the wilderness. 4, a wolf in sheep's clothing. And 5, a house divided cannot stand. What's in common with all of these particular idioms? The source is the Bible. There are literally scores of idioms in the Bible that we use every day, and we probably don't recognize that their source is in the Bible. I will note a couple of these. A broken heart, once again, an idiom is what? A figurative use of language or phrase that is not literal. One doesn't literally have a broken heart, but because you can't break a heart, but it's used in common everyday language to mean someone who's had an emotional experience, either in a relationship, typically in a relationship, and has suffered a loss somehow. And the source of that particular one, if anyone's interested, is Psalms 34:18. Okay. And hopefully people have heard of these idioms before. They're pretty common. A cross to bear. Everyone. You might hear someone say, everyone has their cross to bear. Literally, we're not carrying around crosses, but it's meant to signify or mean that you have some burden that you're carrying, whether it's a problem in your life or a situation you're dealing with. That's your cross to bear. That is in. Oh, I missed the site for that one. So I have to. The next one is a voice crying in the wilderness. That comes from John 1:23. The exact quote is out of the King James. He said, "I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord, as said the prophet Isaiah." So a voice crying in the wilderness, typically when you're referring to someone who's making a claim or asserting something that's they're on their own. They're the sole proponent of what they're saying. They're kind of out on an island by themselves. They're not part of the crowd. Somebody who's typically, in everyday language, somebody that's ahead of their time, or speaking against what is the majority opinion. Next one, a wolf in sheep's clothing. That comes from Matthew 7:15. Beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Okay, typically refers to someone who presents themselves as being on your side, or a friend, or someone that's not a danger, but really is underneath. I've seen this used in many situations, but and I think it's used in more than once in the Bible. That's just one particular quote. The last one that I picked out was, "A house divided cannot stand." And this particular one was interesting because many people, if you hear that said, they'll refer to Lincoln, President Lincoln, who was our 16th president, making this statement. He actually made the statement before he became president when he was running for the Senate in Illinois. And I'll read the part of the speech. It's one of his more famous or often quoted statements in the speech. And he's responsible for the Gettysburg Address. His second inaugural address was very famous, but this was in 1958, before he was ever president or nominated to be president. He was running for a seat in the Senate against Stephen Douglas. If anyone familiar with history, U.S. history around this time, will remember there were these famous Lincoln-Douglas debates in Illinois, where these two stood out for hours at a time and debated topics of the day, one of which was slavery in the new territories at the time. And this is part of the speech that I wanted to read. "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union being the country, the United States at the time, to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it, arrest means stop, and place it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that is in the course of ultimate extinction, or its advocates will push it forward till it shall become lawful in all the states, old as well as new, north as well as south." Remember, historically, and this is in Mark 3:25. Remember, historically, at this time, the North was free in the sense that slavery did not exist in the North, and in the South, slavery was lawful. That caused the Civil War. And essentially, there were new territories coming into the United States at the time, and there was a fight over whether they'd be free or slave, and that was the subject of what this debate was about, because he and Douglas were out in Illinois in an area where the issue was front and center, whether slavery should exist in the new territories. And ultimately that led to the Civil War that started just as Lincoln became president in 1861. Okay, so for homework, for anyone who's so inclined to do this, I'd like you to find one biblical idiom. You can Google it. They're pretty easy to find, and I want you to that's step one. Find something that interests you. You can just Google biblical idioms. You'll find scores of them. And then I want you to see if you can find whether something that's significant like this one, "A house divided cannot stand," if it's been anywhere used in U.S. history, in a speech or a pronouncement of some type. Because I think we often just don't understand that these come from the Bible, a lot of these statements. Okay, so much for idioms tonight. Like I said, I want to talk about sort of parts of sentences. Get beyond. Remember, we've talked about nouns and verbs. In the typical sentence, we have this say, a basic sentence. We have a subject and a verb or predicate. That's the basic building block of a sentence. But as you know, they're a lot more complicated than simply a noun and a verb typically. The thing I want to introduce you to are two terms that are often used as parts of sentences. There are clauses and there are phrases. And you don't have to learn all the language that's associated with these, but it helps to understand when you're looking at a sentence what's fish and what's fowl. What's the subject? What's the verb? Is this a clause that relates to the verb or relates to the subject or a phrase? And the different types that exist. So on the typically a clause, the most simple clause, is has this subject predicate situation. The voter mailed his absentee ballot. That is a clause. The voter would be the subject. Mailed is the verb, past tense. His absentee ballot. Okay, the ballot being the object of the action. Okay. There are two types of clauses. We call them sometimes independent clauses. And then we have what are called subordinate clauses. Subordinate clauses do not stand on their own as sentences. Independent clauses, as the name suggests, do. Okay. There are also functional types of clauses. So, I just want to set these out so you can think about how the clause may be used. There's a declarative clause. Okay, and since we're in a time of an election right now, an ongoing election that hasn't ended. An example of that would be the voter mailed his ballot. Simply declaring a fact. That's why it's called declarative. All right, then there's what's called an interrogative clause. Another type of clause you may come across in reading. Did the voter mail his ballot? Okay. Then there's imperative clause. Again, we're talking just about the function of the clause in a sentence. So this one simply says, mail the absentee ballot at once. Okay. The verb in this sentence is mail. There is no subject noun, but it's implied that it's you, whoever the speaker is speaking to. Mail the absentee ballot at once. Okay. That's the imperative function example. And then there's something called, again, you don't have to remember these these terms, exclamative or exclamatory clause, and sometimes you'll recognize these by the exclamation point at the end. There are 2 million absentee ballots to count. Exclamation point. What am I'm exclaiming surprise that 2 million absentee ballots have to be counted. Okay, so those are the types of functions in a sentence for a clause. Remember, very simple concept of what it is. And, you know, as I pointed out before, there's independent clauses. Each of these would be an independent clause. It could exist on its own as a sentence as I've written it here. It's not a subordinate clause that's dependent on some other structure within the sentence. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about briefly are phrases. Okay. Now, different structures you will see these in. You can have a noun phrase. You can have prepositional phrases. These are kind of the more common ways you'll see phrases. They don't, prepositional phrase. The difference between a phrase and a clause, I would say, is the phrase is not going to stand on its own. So let me just try an example here. So the sentence would be, apropos of where we are in the election, the Michigan voter would be subject, right? Currently working in Wisconsin, which is the state right next door to Michigan in the Midwest, mailed his absentee ballot. Okay. As I said, the voter is the subject. That's the noun here, voter. And the verb would be mailed. And what did he mail? His ballot. Now what's the rest of the verbiage in the sentence? Well, this right here, one would call a noun phrase. The Michigan voter. This is a definite article. This is in a sense, an adjective here. It's not any kind of voter, it's a Michigan voter, or a resident of Michigan who is voting, who is casting a ballot. Now, what else do we have in the sentence? What other phrase? So this, an example of a noun phrase would be this, okay? There's another phrase here, currently working in Wisconsin, okay? That phrase modifies voter again. What kind of Michigan voter? Not any Michigan voter, but this particular Michigan voter is one who's currently working in Wisconsin. So it's descriptive of this. It's not a prepositional phrase. But I'm going to add something to this sentence to show you a prepositional phrase. So the Michigan voter currently working in Wisconsin mailed his ballot during his day off Friday. to meet the voting deadline of Tuesday, November 3rd. Okay, so other phrases here. During his day off. Okay, that'd be another phrase. This is really a participle here, but it's acting to describe when the mailing occurred. He mailed his absentee ballot when? During his day off from work. You could add that in there. From work is a prepositional phrase. And this last part is also a phrase. To meet the voting deadline of Tuesday, November 3rd. The preposition or infinitive phrase, to meet the voting deadline of Tuesday, November 3rd. That is a phrase that will not stand on its own. You can't say, put these words, just this phrase up and have it as a sentence, because it doesn't have a subject or a predicate in it. So those are the things when you're reading or you're writing or you're listening to English, I want you to think about as parts of the sentence. We've gotten beyond nouns and subjects and verbs. Start thinking about how these phrases and clauses work in a sentence to build sentences or to make sentences more interesting. And lastly, as I said before, if you choose to do the homework, our email address will be on this video or attached to this video. But I want you to find a biblical idiom, just Google it, and see if you can find a place in U.S. history where that idiom may have been used. I gave you a great example of a house divided, a very easy example that Lincoln had used, but see if you can find your own. And that concludes our lesson 5. Thank you.